Uh, Thanks for the time for us to present some updates on the Gilt Acclimation project. Um, I know we are running a little bit late, and we'll try to be somewhat brief on this. Um, and and to be honest, I'm not going to be the one presenting because all of the work is being done by Cassie, a PhD student here with me, and she's right next to me, and she put these slides together, and she's gonna be giving you guys the update on the project. But feel free to stop us if you have any questions, and let us know if you guys can hear us well. Okay.
We can hear you perfectly.
Great, great. So, Cassie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I've been working on the Gilt Acclimation project since July 1st. And so first I'm going to just start with a brief introduction of the project and how the data and things like that before I go into what I've been working on. So, okay, oh, there it goes. So the Gilt Acclimation project, 7 breeding companies were involved with 2 or 3 multiplier herds per company and 2 to 4 commercial herds per multiplier, with 23 total commercial herds that the data came from. And these commercial herds were chosen based on their past natural health challenges. So that's how these commercial farms were chosen. And so gilts came in groups, which we refer to from here on out as the contemporary groups, and so 10 to 63 gilts per group. And they followed acclimation and gilt rearing procedures based on the farm, on each different farm. So this is the timeline of data collection. So the gilts entered, and body weight and serology data were collected. And then approximately 40 days later, there was another time point of post-acclimation where body weight and serology data were collected as well. And then they were bred, and reproductive data was collected for parities 1 through 4, or until the sow had left the herd. And so reproductive performance was collected for each of the parities, and serum was collected in parities 1 and 2. And then you can see here, I don't know, yeah, there we go. You can see down here, this is what was collected, but not really what I haven't started really working on this yet. It's part of the future work on it, so I'm not really going to go into this today. So I've, like I said, been working on this since July 1st. I presented a poster at NSIF, the National Swine Improvement Federation and PERS Joint Conference in December in Chicago. The genetic analysis of reproductive traits in commercial sows in health challenge herds in February, so a month from now. I'll be presenting further work, the genomic analysis of the reproductive traits at World Congress in New Zealand. So this is kind of how the data looked initially. This is a breakdown of farms, and you can see most farms had 4 parities, but there were some that only had 1 or 2, or that only had 2 parities, and I think there was one that had 3, right here, had only 3 parities worth of data from that one. And so data, and these are the final numbers, the final animal numbers. We have a breakdown of parities 1 through 4, and then the first number is the number of records we have for each trait, and then in parentheses is the number of farms that were represented. represented. And so we had initially had low numbers of stillborn and mummies, and I spent some time since this this project was last presented, working on getting these numbers to be correct and match up with the total born. And so these are the final numbers that I have for this data. And but there's still a few things that I'm missing as far as this is concerned. So for about 250 records, I have either missing or a date that is wrong for breeding and farrowing date. I was calculating gestation length, and so not necessarily correct when I have a gestation length of -200. So some of those things aren't necessarily correct in this data set, and I'm also missing birth dates and entry dates for about 650 animals as well, and that's from about 2/3 of the farms. I'm missing at least a few of those. So the data cleaning is still in progress as far as some things go, but we have the numbers cleaned up now at this point. So this was presented before the genomic analysis. I jumped right into the genomic analysis instead of starting with what I'd normally start with, the basics of some of the basics of analysis, like AS Remel analysis. But so I analyzed each parity as a separate trait, and looked at total born, number born alive, number stillborn, number mummified, and number weaned, and use the genomic information to find a QTL. And so this has been presented before, like I said. So for total born, you can see a few QTL, about 7% of the variance at this QTL for parity 1, which corresponds in the literature is corresponded to corpus luteum number 7% here for total born, number stillborn, and mummies. And then in parity 4, QTL that, I don't know where it went.
Did you close it? Just a second.
I was trying to get rid of that banner at the bottom.
Okay.
And for parity 4, 11% of the total variation, we found a QTL here. And for number born alive, in parity 1, we found a previously unreported QTL that represents 8% of the variation, and 7% on another QTL for number born alive in parity 1. For number stillborn, we found one here that represents 20% of the variation. For mummies, we found a small one that represents 4% of the variation. And for number wean, we found a 1 in parity 2, 1 in parity 3, and 2 in parity 4. So then I got back, and what I've been doing more recently was what I would normally have started with, the genetic parameters and the effects of different traits on the reproductive performance in AS Remel. So these are the heritabilities broken down by parity and then run all together. And when you break it down by parity, they tend to increase for parity 2 and 3 for a few of them, and then they go back down for parity 4. But the when you analyze them all together, the the standard errors are much lower than what you get when you separate out the parities, and they're more of an average of what the parities were. So one of the questions we had been looking at was, what effect does the acclimation period have on subsequent reproductive performance? And so everything from here on out is very preliminary. Just very preliminary results that I've recently gotten. So we looked at if average daily gain had an effect on subsequent reproductive performance, and what we found was surprising, that these show that an increase in average daily gain causes a decrease in total born, number born alive, and number weaned for parities 1 and parity 3, and they were significant. But as you can see, for total born, number born alive, these effects are very, very small. So one thing, a question that was asked of me was, did I include age? Because that could have a big impact on how how much of an effect this really is, or if it's significant. So I added age into the model and found that number weaned was still significant for parity 3, and the effect was still negative, which is still surprising, and even larger. So we're still trying to determine what this means, and a lot more work needs to be done to determine how accurate these effects are, because it's possible to get a false positive.
And also, you know, I think that those that have been working on this project understand that there are many confounding effects. You know, we're working with 23 farms, so whatever happens in those farms are confounded with those farms. We try to account to whatever we can, you know, but as Cassie pointed out, there is some data is not consistent necessarily across farms. You know, I mean, about 600 animals do not have age information, for instance. But so although this is a statistical analysis, this is also some sort of descriptive. We're trying to see, are there any factors that we have, you know, that we can, extract from the data and see if we can have a better understanding of what are the acclimation effects that we have on subsequent performance. Okay, so also, you know, even though it was significant, the first analyses, the effect of growth during acclimation on total born and number born alive, it's fairly small, you know, so 0.13, you know, piglets, that's a fairly small effect. And also, but even when you look at number weaned, even though it's a somewhat large effect, especially when you add age in the model, you know, the range of age is also not that huge. So it's not like one animal has a kilo over another animal that would imply that every kilo extra per day will result in half a piglet as well, you know? So we're trying to understand a little bit of the data as well. Just wanted to add that a little bit.
So the next thing I tried to look at was the number of times a sow was bred and how that affected her reproduction. So I'm really counting the number of times the sow failed to get pregnant. So I guess it's a negative. So more is not better in this case. And so what I found when I looked at the number of times she was inseminated was I found a significant effect for number born dead mummies and number wean, with which this would indicate that an increase in the number of times she was bred would cause a decrease in born dead and a increase in number wean. Again, this is very preliminary. This not saying that we should select for sows that need to be bred more times, but these effects are also pretty small. But there was something else I was going to say, and I just lost it.
This is only using, so you have to understand also that the classification of times as the sow is bred is, those that fail more, actually,
Mm-hmm.
So we also need to understand that some animals are removed from the herd,
Yeah, that's
if they fail, once they're removed. So this is also some kind of biased as well. But we're trying to understand a little bit what are the new information that we can get from this complex and large data set.
Nick, it's Mike here. Can I just ask a question on that point then too? So if you're counting if you're looking at the sows that actually are still in the data set, those are the ones that actually achieved a pregnancy at, say, a second or third insemination. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so that would mean I'm not surprised that you might be seeing better performance, because if they didn't get pregnant the first time, that's probably because they had some sort of challenge and were probably recovering from them. So breeding second and third usually means that they're, if you kept them in the herd, they've had a chance to compensate for something.
Sure. Yeah, and I agree. Yeah, but also, so when the sow is bred, we're counting within a parity.
Okay.
Yeah. Just it's slightly different, but I do understand and I agree with your point as well.
Okay.
But for instance, Cassie said that it was a sow that within that given parity, I don't know which one, she was bred 7 times to thorough that given parity,
Yeah.
And she was kept in the herd. So
yeah.
Good for us, but maybe not so much for the farm.
So just a clarification on that. When you talk about the number of times she's bred, that's the number of heat cycles or the number of times within a heat cycle that she's bred?
No, heat cycles.
Okay.
7 heat cycles?
Okay.
Yeah.
He was a damn good sow.
Somebody liked her.
The number would be even higher if I had counted when she was bred like 3 days in a row. There's no help. So I didn't count that as 3 different inseminations unless she was bred again sometime later.
Yep. Okay, I just wanted clarification.
Great.
So the next question I asked was, what about gestation length? Does it have any bearing on reproductive performance, any effect? And I found a significant but very, very tiny effect for stillborn. It indicates an increase in gestation length would cause a decrease in number of stillborn, but again, it's a very small number, 0.003. So, but so I guess the most I feel very interesting part of this and challenging was looking at pre-weaning mortality and its relationship to reproductive performance. And so what I mean by pre-weaning mortality is, I guess very uniquely, I'd never had in a data set before. I had reasons that piglets died. And so I broke those out and grouped them into 9 categories, which in the future I'd like to break that down further into maybe 5 categories or fewer. But I found the reason for mortality was significant for all traits. And like I said, there's a lot more work to be done. I'd like to combine some of these categories potentially. And I'm not, I guess, not really sure about what these numbers mean or how the category for death, how that relates to number born alive necessarily, but these are the results for number weaned. And so I'll just go through what the categories were that I had broken down into. So the first one there listed as sick. So if they were sick, E. coli or scours or something like that, I classified them as sick. There were some miscellaneous deaths like heart attack that I listed into other. And mother, I listed ones that were starved, not starved, ones that were laid on or attacked. I can't think of the word right now. Quality control, QC is quality control, so the runts, the low viability. Another category was starve outs, and then there were unknown. Castration, if there was a problem with castration, they had a problem when they were being castrated or post-castration that caused them to die. Deformities or injuries. So those are the 9 categories that I looked at. And again, I think that potentially some of these are related and could be combined, but as of now, what it looks like is you have fewer number weaned for animals. So sick was used as the baselines, and so in more number weaned for those that were killed by the mother, quality control, starved, unknown, castration, or deformity than sick. So you'd have less number weaned for when the piglets were classified as sick, or less when they were classified as other or had an injury than for the other categories. And so there's still a lot to be interpreted with this trait, but and I think it's very interesting to look at, and certainly something I've never looked at before, so I'm interested in doing more work in this. So some conclusions. As we know, reproductive data is lowly heritable, tended to be more heritable after parity 1, is what I showed here. For the GWAS, we found some QTL in parity 1 for total born and number born alive, and stillborn mummy and number weaned for other parities. And there does seem to be some effect between reproductive performance with the number of times a sow was bred, her gestation length, and the pre-weaning mortality. The next steps, like I said, I want to work more with the pre-weaning mortality trait, and along with that, I'd also like to look at mortality of the sow or the gilt as a trait and see how that affects reproductive performance. And I'd like to look more into the acclimation procedures, like I looked at with average daily gain. I've also looked a little bit into vaccination, but I want to do more into that and look at how the different farms exposed the gilts during acclimation, direct, indirect, or vaccination. We're going to do some genomic prediction for reproductive performance with these traits in this data, and have a manuscript by the end of the year for this part that I talked to you about here. And then much later work after that, I'm going to begin working with the serology part in the relationship with reproduction. And that concludes my talk. I hope I caught us up in time a little bit, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Cassie, and thank you, Nick. Any questions for Cassie or Nick from that? With a little bit of discussion as we went. Any clarifications, discussion? Going once. Anybody online?
One question, it's Bob here. I know early on, Nick, you looked a little bit at trying to categorize sort of overall productivity of these sows, and I noticed that one of the next steps was to investigate culling. But I guess I'm wondering what your plans are in trying to look at some of these lifetime measures and impact of say GWAS or Cetra on that whole area, because that was a major focus of the project.
Yeah, and that still is. I mean, this next steps, it was a very summarized way to fit everything in one slide. But yeah, lifetime productivity is still a major focus. And yeah, one thing that I missed is that now that Cassie cleaned the whole data, that now the numbers make sense. That was one of the issues that we had in the previous conversation, that the numbers did not match. Now she's going to recalculate. She's recalculating the lifetime productivity data again, and yeah, certainly that'll be the focus, and especially, once we put the serology data together with this, how does all of those serology parameters, especially during the acclimation period, how that correlates with lifetime productivity. But certainly, yes, that's part of the next steps.